Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Essential NFL Podcast. My name is Stephen Clinton. I'm your host here, resident film junkie slash data scientist, and getting a chance to hop in to talk about the NFL Week 7 slate here. So, apologies for not being able to put a show out last week. Just had several things going on in life, a few things in transition, and was not able to find the time to sit and talk ball, which is always a disappointment, but get a chance to do it today. So, let's jump right into it here. I'm gonna, hop over to covers.com here and just start rolling through the action. And I guess before I start, I'll just briefly comment on the results of the Thursday night football game. I'm recording this on Friday morning. I guess that if it wasn't the NFL, it'd be the sort of thing that shocks you, right? But it is the NFL, and it's the AFC North, and it's things just happen, right? And it's just amazing to see something happen where Aaron Rodgers is able to put up this many points and everything, and then the Steelers defense is just not able to hold up their end of the bargain. So don't want to comment a whole lot beyond on the specifics of the game because I haven't watched the film, didn't watch the broadcast either. I was actually got the opportunity to go out to a Jack Carr book signing event. So have my most recent novel up here, The Bubble Society, and then have Jack Carr's most recent book, signed edition of Cry Havoc right here. So highly recommend that one if you're into the thriller genre and like the James Reese series. But so that was a really cool deal. But did miss the Thursday night football game, and I'll get to that film probably this afternoon here, and I'll get that cleared out going into the weekend. Always nice to keep the number of games low going into the week, but. At the end of the day, the big takeaway is it just opens the AFC North up and gives the Ravens a legitimate chance to recover. They obviously have things to figure out in Baltimore, but at the same time, we have seen that Ravens defense have to figure things out as the season built on in previous years. If memory serves correctly here, we also saw John Harbaugh fire his offensive coordinator, and gosh, did he bring in? I'm going to get it wrong if I try to say who he brought in, but brought in a different coordinator to work with Joe Flacco down the stretch, and that sparked their Super Bowl run, if memory serves. So a lot can happen in the NFL, and Lamar Jackson, pretty good player from what I've seen. So this makes things a lot more interesting with the Steelers failing to capitalize on an opportunity to continue to build their lead in that division and to win a division game, which could very well wind up being a tiebreaker here if they end up splitting with the Ravens. So we'll see how it all shakes out. Obviously tiebreakers are complicated, but gotta love the NFL, and this certainly adds some additional intrigue to the mix with the Steelers failing to win that Thursday night football game. So let's jump into this. So Los Angeles Rams at the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is the going to be played over in London here, if I'm not mistaken, overseas game for sure. Pretty sure it's London. So many venues these days, but anyways, Rams are favored by 3 in this game. Totals at 44.5. I don't know that there's any particularly strong opportunity here. I don't know these overseas games. I feel like they're always wonky, but I think that the big matchup to watch and the big question to get answered here is what are the Jacksonville Jaguars going to do to combat the Los Angeles Rams defensive line? And I guess let me just briefly say, I think that any concerns about the Ravens' performance against the Ravens last week are pretty overblown. I felt like they didn't do a great job of turning yardage into points at times, but I felt like that was a reasonably dominant performance by the Rams on the whole. Obviously left some opportunities on the field. It wasn't a perfect game. I'm not trying to express that, but on a down-to-down basis, I did not feel like that was like some super close game between the Rams and the Ravens, I guess is all I'm trying to express there. And there's don't want to waste too much of my time here today on that game, but getting into back to this Rams Jacksonville matchup. we saw the Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line, which, had been, a big concern of mine coming into the season, that had been, somewhat alleviated just by the nature of how they were running the offense and a lot of things they were able to do to help those guys out. At the same time, watching that Houston Texans Jacksonville Jaguars game and watching what was happening to Arianti Ursere for the Texans in that game and Walker Little for the Jaguars in that game was not good. But anyways, I think that you saw Walker Little's, deficiencies show up in a huge way against Seattle Seahawks, against a variety of, Seattle's deep cast of pass rushers, right? Because, you got guys like Leonard Williams bouncing out to the edge, you got all sorts of actual edge rushers. So, they do a lot in Seattle. And, that's, a similar test to what the Jaguars are going to get with the Los Angeles Rams defensive line. And, maybe the Rams don't come at you quite in waves the way that the Seattle Seahawks do, but I think that the high end players are certainly right on up there, and Jared Verse continues to play as well as really I think he's as impactful as pretty much any defensive lineman in football right now. I think you can count these guys on your hands. Probably not defensive player of the year just because of the counting numbers and everything, but he's just so impactful and so overwhelmingly powerful and just consistently collapsing pockets and allowing everybody else to do work around him. And then I think that Byron Young has just continued to come on as a player, guy that I really liked from the get-go when he joined the Rams, and I think that he's just continued to make more and more of an impact. What are we in year 3? Man, must be year 4 it might be year 4 for Byron Young at this point. The years fly by in this business, that's for sure. But I think he does a great job. Kobe Turner is just awesome on the interior, and there's a whole cast of guys there. And then I think that before I get back to the Jacksonville Jaguars line and how they might combat this, I also want to throw out that Nate Landman has wildly exceeded my expectations playing for the Rams, and I just kind of had Nate Landman lumped in with kind of a what felt like a lengthy list of inside linebackers for the Atlanta Falcons, who I just didn't think really fit the bill in terms of guys they've kind of drafted and brought along. Obviously a huge Caden Ellis fan, but I think Nate Landman has been just making plays all over the field for this Rams defense. I think he's playing with good anticipation and seems to have good instincts for how to operate in this scheme. So I think that's been a really pleasant surprise. I'd love to shout out when guys are just popping off film in ways I didn't expect. It's always cool to see. So in terms of what the Jaguars are going to do, in some ways it's hard to say what they can do, right? Because I think that this comes down to a talent deficiency at the end of the day. I don't think that Ezra Cleveland or Patrick McCarry is going to be any better than the fifth best starter on a good offensive line. I felt like that was probably where McCarry slotted in for the Ravens last year. The aforementioned Walker Little, I just don't think he has the play strength or some sort of other superpower to make up for that at offensive tackle to be a functional offensive tackle in this league. And I remember thinking, I think they played the Jaguars actually, the same week that he got handed that contract by Trent Baalke last year, and I think it was Josh Hines-Allen doing something to him. It's like, I just do not understand why you would sign up to see this twice a year for the next 3 years. Like, I wouldn't want to see it. I don't want to be watching it in this game last year, so I don't see why you're setting up for any more of this. But it's not great. And then obviously Rob Hainsey out for this game, dropping off to your backup center, and then Anton Harrison, I think he's probably your best lineman there, but I don't think Anton Harrison is necessarily anything special. I think he's maybe moves around as a little bit better size than Jawan Taylor did, who was playing right tackle for the Jaguars before him. But I don't see like overwhelming traits with Anton Harrison, and see him get overwhelmed physically at times, and just doesn't stand out. And I think he's certainly a functional right tackle in the NFL. But if that's your best offensive lineman, and you got all these other guys, there are certain matchups where you're going to be able to make that work because, the NFL, the reality is that there's only so many teams that match up to take advantage of certain deficiencies. You got to take your stars where you can get them, right? And we don't make teams of all pros. But, I think it's going to be really difficult for them to operate. So, I think it's really incumbent on Liam Cohen and the Jaguar staff to, they've mentioned getting Travis Hunter a lot more involved, hopefully a lot more involved on offense because, his highlight plays in the primetime game aside, like he is just not consistently impacting the game, and it's not a lack of athleticism out there. So I think that Brian Thomas is playing better. There's still gaps where dropping balls, things like that, but they need to get him geared up. They need to get Travis Hunter more involved in this. I think the run game's doing a great job, but if Trevor Lawrence and the skill players around him, and let's face it, that's where the investment has been recently for the Jaguars and into the future apparently, because I don't see a lot of evidence that Travis Hunter is going to be able to consistently impact the game on both sides, outside of a few spot plays and highlights. And that's your first round pick next year. So you picked Brian Thomas in the first round last year, and at the end of the day, if that's where your investment is, it better feel like it, and you better feel like you can run through those receivers. So I think that this is a huge matchup for them to do that. Obviously didn't work out against a banged up Seahawks secondary last week, and the Rams don't have, in my estimation, any standout players in that secondary. So this should be an opportunity for Trevor Lawrence and the skill players to really shine and carry this team. But at the end of the day, you can take this all the way back to the selections that Urban Meyer made in his first draft, where it was really building. In my estimation, an emphasis on building the team from the outside in with skill players and back to the line. And at the same time, Dan Campbell was taking over in Detroit and taking a very, very decidedly different approach and building from the line out. And I think in the NFL, you just got to do it that way. So, we talked a lot about that London game, but, I do think it's just a really, really interesting matchup. And I think we're going to learn a lot about the Jacksonville Jaguars in this game because, I do want to say on the positive side for Jacksonville, I felt like they had been steadily getting better, and they felt really sloppy in that Carolina game out of the gate, and there have been a lot of moments that feel sloppy as it comes along, but I did think that was all improving and everything. And it's also not as if there weren't chances against the Seahawks. So, there's certainly ways that game could have gone differently. So I don't think that, it's don't throw out your stock in the Jaguars at this point by any means, but like any team in the NFL, they're having to figure out questions about how they're going to handle certain matchups, and the fact that we're going to get to see this Rams defensive line that presents a similar problem as the Seahawks play against the Jaguars a week after that. It's just a really cool matchup in my opinion. So speaking of really cool matchups, next game up here, the New England Patriots, they are favored by 7 on the road going into Tennessee. Total of 42.5 there. So, we get a very interesting scenario here because, that you get your fired coach first week boost for the Tennessee Titans with Brian Callahan and offensive line coach Bill Callahan, his father, out of the building in Tennessee, and Mike McCoy, the former head coach of San Diego Chargers. Yeah, after his work with Peyton Manning in Denver, takes over as the interim head coach. That is perhaps mitigated, though, in this, football gypsy world by Mike Vrabel making his return to Tennessee at the helm of the New England Patriots, who look, I think about as good as any team in the league right now. And I think that there's a lot of teams clumped at the top. I'm not trying to say that New England's running away, but I struggle to see what I'm not supposed to like about this Patriots team, to be honest. I think that the offensive line is playing pretty good ball across, as a unit. I'm really enjoying watching Will Campbell play. I watched my week 1 show, did note that, the frame sticks out a little bit, but, the feet seem to be really good. And, that's just continued to show itself. Really good feet, really good awareness, just, plays with a lot of nasty and great football attitude as well. So I think, they hit a home run with their first round draft pick this year. I think that, they're getting a lot out of Gerard Wilson at the left guard spot. And then, Garrett Bradbury is not the best center, but, he's serviceable. And, he's doing a solid job there. And then the right side's been solid. And, I think that the receivers are coming along. Obviously, Diggs, finding more and more opportunities. I think that, Kayshon Boutte is doing a good job, making plays on the balls that he's getting. He doesn't necessarily get the most separation in the world, but with the way that Drake May is spinning that ball right now, that's not mattering in some cases. And Boutte does have good hands, and he does a lot of good things as a football player. So, you add in these explosives they're getting out of Pop Douglas now, and everything they're getting in with Travion Henderson and Stevenson, and everything McDaniels is schemed up. And I've talked at length about the Patriots on the show, but it's pretty exciting to see what's going on there. And then the defense, now that Christian Gonzalez is back across from Carlton Davis, I feel like that's totally changed the equation for them because obviously, don't need to keep throwing the guy under the bus, but the guy who was starting in his place early on, that was the target on the New England defense. And now that that's gone, we're seeing this defensive line just continue to make plays. And it seems like all the free agent signings are working out, all coming together. And then, the cherry on top is that the quarterback has, fully emerged as, I don't know. He's at the point where he'll, keep tweaking his game, and there's always improvements to be made. I think any NFL quarterback that you talk to about their craft feels that way. But like, I don't know. I'm not seeing like some glaring weakness with the way that Drake May plays football right now. Briefly touching on the other side of it, obviously, Tennessee's in disarray. They just fired their coach, but for Titans fans out there looking for some semblance of hope, like. I do think just watching Cam Ward on a down-to-down basis, like, I think that there's no question that he obviously needs to improve as an NFL player and cut down on the turnovers and everything. But, I'm looking up at the date on my calendar right now, and it's October 17th in his rookie year. And he's playing on a bad team in a bad situation where the coach just got fired. I don't know how you don't enjoy watching Cam Ward play football right now. And, could he get a little more accurate? Sure. Could he make some better decisions? Of course, but he's a rookie quarterback in his first year, and we'll talk about other guys as the show goes on. It's my favorite topic of discussion. This is not a league where you see guys honestly walk in and just dominate to that degree, and there's a few rare exceptions, but that's not the norm. And even among those guys who excel out of the gates, there is usually more growth to be had to really take their craft to the top. And we'll see what happens with Cam Ward on a 2-3 year trajectory here. And he's obviously going to be dealing with some organizational change and all, but I would not be out on him by any means right now. I think that we'll talk about Caleb Williams in the next game, but relative to where Caleb was last year, I mean, I don't know why you would be super concerned about Cam Ward at this stage in his career based on what he's put on tape right now. And that's not to suggest he's suddenly gonna win every game the rest of the way. It's a tough league, but he seems pretty talented to me. So moving on to another couple of talented quarterbacks, to varying degrees. New Orleans Saints at the Chicago Bears. Bears are favored by 4.5 in this game, and the total's 46.5. Seeing a 5 in some places. That's a game where the New Orleans Saints are a very solid football team, and I think that if the salary cap wasn't going up the way that it is projected to go up, which the projected growth is just crazy, right? And I've written about that in the spring and how that really affects roster outlooks. And I was a big proponent of the Saints hitting the brakes, and fortunately the salary cap growth makes that less important, and they were kind of forced to hit the brakes to some degree with Derek Carr's situation, although they didn't stop them from trading a pick for Javon Bailey because obviously they couldn't have lived without him. But in any case, this team's coming along pretty well, and I think that when you look at the offensive line, it's just a really good situation either for Spencer Rattler to continue developing or for whoever steps in there next. And I think that Kelvin Banks continues to look like a promising player at left tackle. I think that Fuaga has looked good in his move over to the right side. They've got Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz. I mean, that tandem has been good for a long time there. And now that Trevor Penning is out on the field, I've been pleasantly surprised with how his move to guard has gone. And his first appearance in the preseason, I thought we were going to get like a repeat of the whole Garrett Bowles situation. Pre Garrett Bowles developing when he was just holding on a constant basis. I mean, Penning's first drive in the preseason, I was genuinely confused as to how he thought he was allowed to do most of what he was doing. I think he got called for a couple holds at the end, but I thought you could have called him for 5 or 6 holds. He seems to have figured it out, and he's definitely got size in there. So he's not taking penalties in the numbers I had feared might happen, and he's can definitely move around in there. So I think there's a lot of good in New Orleans right now. Kendre Miller is playing definitely the best ball of his career. Just talking about young players that you're going to be able to grow around, and then Spencer Rattler. It's not like I would say he has overwhelming talent to any degree, but I think that the case that sticks out to me right now that causes me to hesitate about being too dismissive about Spencer Rattler is Baker Mayfield. And, Baker is not the most overwhelming athlete in the world, and he's currently playing quarterback, I say about as good as anybody in the NFL. And, Rattler has done a good job scrambling this year in a similar way to Baker. I think that he, has done a good job, executing within the timing structure of the offense to a degree. I'm not quite sold that he's a legit starting quarterback in this league. He might just be, kind of a high end backup, but, reps and growth can always happen. So, I think that, Rattler has done, enough good things that, it's certainly not disqualifying. So it's going to be interesting to see how he keeps coming along here. And he's going up against the Chicago Bears defense here that, despite, all of Washington's self-inflicted errors last week, I am just really not sold on the Chicago defense at all, really. And there's certainly positive aspects about it. I think that there's good things to be said about the front, but I mean, I feel like Nahshon Wright, rocking 26 there is just continually the target of the opponent's top target, and he's just continuing to struggle. And there's just not enough dominant players in the back end to make up for that. And I think the safeties are just okay. And we'll see how it keeps coming along here. But I guess that's to say that I think that obviously there's positives in Chicago, and the NFL is a hard league to win. But I thought that Washington probably outplayed them, or I do think Washington outplayed them on a down-to-down basis overall, and that's despite Washington playing just some really, really bad defense. And on that note, while Chicago's run game there were definitely some good things and some improvements there. I would point out that some of the things Darnell Wright being back is helpful and all, but there was a play where they hit to the right side where Darnell Wright's getting out on the edge, and he somehow blocked the corner and the safety without touching either one of them. He just, had body position on these two guys, and they were so out of position that Swift hits inside for an explosive. And yeah, I mean, Washington's defense has serious issues in from what I've seen in the back end. And this game really stuck out in that regard in terms of I just don't understand how some of this stuff is happening right here now in terms of just NFL defenders using each other as leverage and stuff like that. So, we'll see. I think that there's a lot of positives to be drawn from how the Bears are building and everything like that. But, I do just think that there's still, kind of a question mark team week to week. I think that starts with the quarterback, who really positive growth for sure from last year. I think that he's growing at a pace that maybe exceeded my expectations or did exceed my expectations coming out of week one for sure. Probably more on par with what I was expecting for the season overall. Because week one there, some of his operational stuff, working the passing game from the pocket was just not clicking. And it's not super smooth at this point, but it is coming along. And when, as I've said many times, when it looks good. I mean, the talent is fantastic, and he just needs to keep getting reps, keep seeing things, and he'll just from what I'm seeing, I think he's going to keep reacting quicker and quicker. He's going to learn this stuff, and he's going to get better and better at it all. And we'll see, when he catches up to kind of maybe Drake May, who I think is playing at such a high level right now. But Caleb has all the tools in the world, and he can definitely get there. So we'll see exactly how that timing works. And hopefully they also have the legal formation that causes the Roma Dunze touchdown to get called back as well. Because for what I said about Washington probably being better and having a chance to win the game if they don't fumble, Chicago did have some big plays taken back on penalty, and that was a bummer for them. So I do think overall that this game could be closer than the 5 points would suggest. If I were playing it, I would play the New Orleans side. Not to say I think they're going to win. I definitely favor Chicago to win the game outright, but I could see a 3 or a 3-5 being a fair number there. So I think you're getting a little bit on the New Orleans side. So yeah, moving along. Miami, Cleveland. So, wow, this total is dropping like a stone, and I know there is some chance of weather in Cleveland, but this was for sure 41. Wednesday night, and it had dropped to 39.5 on Thursday morning at like 5:30, and I'm now looking at it 10:30 on Friday, and the number is at 37 and 36 and a half at FanDuel at this point. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to expect that this is going to be a low-scoring game between the Miami Dolphins and the Cleveland Browns. I would start with the fact that I think that the Cleveland Browns defensive line is going to destroy the Miami offensive line, which just continues to be underwhelming, even in a generally positive offensive performance in a lot of ways against the Chargers. Some mistakes, obviously, that are a bummer, but just again, just the takeaway I have every time I watch this offense is that I've never seen an offense that is so ineffective using their jab. He's a fighting analogy, just running up the middle, which I think has to set the table for everything else that you want to do in the NFL. They just can't do that at all, and it just continues to be a problem. And you just feel like everything is funneled to the sides in this offense, and it's just so specific, right? And obviously there are good things to it, but like it just doesn't feel like it's clicking a lot of the time. And then it's just tough when the offensive line is just not great. And at this point, going up against this Cleveland unit, it's just a really tough situation. And Jalen Waddle is still a good player. The drop that led to the interception, if I'm remembering that right from last week, notwithstanding, but he's going to have Denzel Ward probably checking him the entire game in this one. At least that's how I would call it if I'm Jim Schwartz. And if you take Jalen Waddle away, that just really allows you to focus so much attention on getting Achane shut down. And once that happens, I just don't really know where the Dolphins offense is going to turn. Like, I thought that maybe Darren Waller would be a bigger part of the game plan last week, given, some of what he had done the week before, but I felt like he was an afterthought watching the film. I didn't really feel like they were trying to funnel things through him at all. That wasn't something that stuck out to me, at least when I watched it. So, I think that they've got a lot of problems, and this Cleveland defense is really, really good, and it's going to be a tough day, and Myles Garrett could have just a huge performance in this game. On the flip side of that, it's Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, and the fact I'm having trouble remembering a starting quarterback's name because I keep confusing him with Taylor. I think Taylor Gabriel, the old wide receiver who played for the Browns at one point. Like that kind of tells you all. It tells it all, right? But Dylan Gabriel. Well, maybe just me getting old too. But Dylan Gabriel, I'm just not digging it at all. And I thought that he could have thrown a bunch of interceptions in the last outing. He's just inaccurate. Like too often, right? Like not to say that every throw's off, but like for a guy with his physical tools or lack thereof to succeed in the NFL, his accuracy has to be pinpoint, and it was not pinpoint in his last appearance. And I just don't see it. It's all this short stuff over the middle. Like it does feel like it has shades of the Miami attack in it. The positive to be said about the Cleveland Browns is that I think that Quinshon Judkins is just a dog, right? Like you talk about an every down feature back. I mean, this guy is just setting the tempo for them, and I think that it's not going to work every week because the passing game is so deficient that people are going to be able to key on that run game. And while they are getting pretty good play out of some of those veterans like Joe Bitonio, and Judkins, like I say, is a dog. Like that's only going to take you so far. So the other thing about this under and why I liked it, if you caught that with the number and my tracking of it, is that the Browns are really stretching out drives right now, or that would be their intention. It's a short passing game, and then it's a sustained run game, hopefully. So I think that pairs well for working an under. As I mentioned, I know that there was some weather in the report too. So I'd say stay away from that game in fantasy. As I say, I like that under. It's an idea. Next game up on the slate here, we got the Carolina Panthers and the New York Jets. So the Jets, I guess, would be probably the place to start. I guess Garrett Wilson, my understanding is he's going to be out for a little bit with that knee injury that they had to get checked out. I don't see how this whole situation in New York is going to get better with Garrett Wilson being out. I would say that, like, if they were going to go into this season imagining they were going to run the ball this much. Their run game needed to be way more imaginative than what we're seeing from the New York Jets right now. Like when you think back to Lamar Jackson's first MVP season and you think back to the types of personnel groupings that they were using and just how they were throwing Patrick Ricard at you, and I mean, it felt like a triple option offense in a lot of respects. It was obviously out of the gun. It was adapted, but it was a beast of a run game to deal with from a tactical standpoint, from a just a motion standpoint, from the bodies they threw at you, just all of it. And I would say that the NFL has evolved a lot in handling those running quarterbacks, and just have had can think back to some great discussions I've had with just some friends about just ways that they were seeing defensive coordinators adapt to this stuff, because that's just how the league works. And say it might have been an outdated idea to even try to do this with Justin Fields, but with the way they've approached it, like that would be my biggest criticism in terms of the structure of how they have approached it. Taking a step back, like they need to scheme up a better pass game as well. And like I don't think that they could add an imaginative run game, but and get more out of that, but they also just need to get more out of the pass game at this point. They don't really have the weapons to do it. You don't really feel like it's schemed up that well to do it, or to maybe feature Garrett Wilson in the ways that you might be able to, just getting the ball in one of your best athletes' hands in space. It's not that there's easy answers, but at the same time, the Jets have a lot of talent on their offensive line, and I think that the tackles generally look good. Like I expect that Olu Fashanu and Armand Membu are going to be the guys moving forward, and like we can look at the example out in Seattle with some of the injuries and dips in play and all that stuff that Charles Cross and Abe Lucas have had, but like those guys came into the league together. Fashanu and Membu 1 year apart, but like if I'm comparing those two situations, and I'm say and I liked Abe Lucas and Charles Cross to be the long-term tackles in Seattle, and thought they'd found a coup in getting those 2-in-1 draft, and I don't know, I think Membu and Fashanu fit the bill just as well, so I think that they've got a good offensive line to build around, so it's pretty disappointing to see what's going on there. And then the defense, the Broncos' kind of bizarre strategy against them kind of set aside, and the Broncos just weren't letting Bo Nix do a whole lot in that game. I'm just really not sold on the Jets defense based on the product as a whole. So we got Carolina rolling in here, and I'm not super high on Carolina, all things considered, grand scheme of things. But they're a much more competitive team than the Jets on a week-to-week basis, and the defense, I think it's got its problems, but I have no idea how the Jets are going to take advantage of any of those problems, because, their problems are so significant in the other direction. What we were talking about earlier with the NFL being a league of matchups. Well, I might be able to point to some holes I think that there are in the Panthers defense. If I were trying to attack that with the Jets offense, I don't have any suggestions on how you would do that. On the flip side of the ball, Carolina does have some answers, and obviously Rico Dowdle has taken it to a new level over the past couple of weeks. Just running all over. His former team in the Dallas Cowboys now setting Panthers franchise 2-game records, all sorts of stuff, and now they'll bring Chuba Hubbard back. And if I'm Dave Canales and this coaching staff, and I've got the offensive line I do with Ika Ekwonu being for all the issues in pass protection, from day one, that dude has been a great athlete on the field and a force in the run game, right? So, getting him and Damian Lewis rolling on that left side, I think is, fun to see when they feature the run game. They're dealing with some injuries at other spots, but they, had built up the depth there. So, Brady Christensen, who's had to step in, is not a guy who had not played any football before, right? So, that's always a nice thing to have when, even if, having him and Cade Mays is back playing center. If I'm a lot of names to worry about it sometimes when I'm rattling these all off. But Cade Mays, I thought played well for them down the stretch at center, and I didn't know Austin Corbett was going to come back this year because his injury issues have just been so persistent. So I figured that they were fine with Mays, and then Brady Christensen, as I say, had played a good amount of football. Has versatility. So he's a quality backup to have on your roster in the NFL, and that's paying dividends for the Panthers right now. And yeah, I don't know that I would take back some of the things I said about Bryce Young after a game. What was it, a couple weeks ago? And again, him versus some of these other guys, I just don't know about it as your long term starter. But at the same time, he is more than good enough to take advantage of the opportunities that are presenting itself in this structure and this attack, right? Where it is a run heavy setup, and Terrell McMillan on the outside has just been everything you could expect out of a first round draft pick. I mean, I think he's even a guy drafted as high as him, I think he looks great, and is really setting the table for the rest of the passing game to slot in pretty nicely. Got to see Xavier Legette back on the field, making some plays, and hopefully Jalen Coker is back soon. So all these things considered, NFL is a weird league and all, but Panthers are favored by 1 or 1.5 going into play the Jets, and yeah, I don't know, man. I would be playing that Panthers side of this thing because, as I say, teams surprise us, from time to time, but I just don't know what the surprise is going to be from the Jets, right? What are they going to surprise us with? That Justin Fields can run? Okay, yeah, I think teams have kind of gotten the message on that at this point. So, yeah. Anyways, that's all on that one. So, moving forward, Philadelphia, Minnesota. Who knew a few weeks ago we'd get the Carson Wentz revenge game, right? Certainly nobody at the beginning of the season or before they bring Wentz into the fold. But frankly, I thought Carson Wentz played pretty darn good in making that comeback win a couple of weeks ago. I guess that would have been against the Browns, right? Yeah, I guess that overseas game would have been the last time watched film on Carson Wentz, and yeah, I thought he played really well. It wasn't a perfect game by any means, but in a lot of ways, I would say it was the best game that I think I've ever seen Carson Wentz play as a pro, which is kind of wild. I always loved his film when he was young. I think he's a super talented guy, but anybody who's been following the NFL, I think is familiar with some of his decision making deficiencies, and it's similar to kind of where I started coming around on Sam Darnold at the end of his time in Carolina when he got that second chance, and it was he was making some plays, but I was more impressed with some of the times he was just throwing the ball away and not trying to win the game on one play and losing it instead. And I thought that Wentz did a good amount of that in that game for Minnesota, and against Cleveland. Just looking this up to make sure I'm not making a fool of myself right now. But he had to lead that game-winning drive against the Cleveland Browns, and I think that I had 3 throws that had an above average throw grade in as a big time throw in my throw grading on that game winning drive where they flipped the score. So it's not it was just him handing the ball off against the Cleveland Browns defense. No, he was playing a really good defense, and he was making plays for them. Obviously, he has weapons, all those things that we said about Sam Darnold last year. But somebody has to distribute the ball at the end of the day, and I think that Carson Wentz is doing that at a high level. I don't see how you could put J.J. McCarthy on the field even if he's 100% healthy right now. This is, how do you look at your team and say that we compete and the best players play, and Carson Wentz has played like he's played and J.J. McCarthy's played like he's played? And, I mentioned this on the pod before, but, the idea that guys have to play to get better is just ridiculous. We saw this most recently. I think Jordan Love is such a good example of got to play one game and then got a year off, and then clearly had improved when he took the field against the Philadelphia Eagles. So, and we could talk about Malik Willis, right? Obviously a better player for the Green Bay Packers, I think you would say, than a discard for the Tennessee Titans. I could go through example after example, right? And, waste the rest of the pod. But in any case, JJ should be able to continue to develop. He got to play NFL game speed. He knows what it looks like now in regular season games. He should have been able to draw a lot of lessons from that, should be able to work on a lot of things in the background as he recovers, and Carson Wentz, if he continues to play well, does his thing. So, we'll see how this works. Obviously Vikings have a lot of talent, and the Eagles, it sounds like they are going to have, a few guys who are banged up available for this game, but, they obviously have some issues in Philadelphia right now, as we saw in that, debacle of a loss against the Giants on Thursday Night Football a week and a half ago. And, I don't know, it's just a revolving door at that third corner spot. And if Quinyon Mitchell's not healthy, that's just a whole different discussion. But the Vikings have too many weapons between what Justin Jefferson brings as, best receiver in football, or Jamar Chase obviously made his case last night. But like up there, and Jordan Addison doing his thing, and then obviously Hawkinson, and then what they bring with the run game is just such a complete offense. And so that they're going to be able to pick on Philadelphia's weak points, and if Wentz can take advantage of that, it's going to be tough. And we'll see what happens with the matchup between this Brian Flores defense and the current Philadelphia offense. But the last time I remember this matchup happening, in the sense of the Nick Sirianni hands-on offense, and Kevin Bagula, or whatever his OC's name is, like Sirianni's right-hand guy, right? And 2 seasons ago, it was Brian Johnson, quote unquote, running the offense, but Sirianni had his hands on it, and they had what seemed like it should have been a great matchup against the Vikings in, I think, maybe the second week of the season that year. And it's like, just ask AJ Brown to run by those guys on the outside all day with the way they're playing the structure, and it wasn't that at all. They really struggled with what Minnesota threw at them. So, we'll see if they've learned any lessons on that. But, yeah, I think it's a Philadelphia team that feels like it's in disarray right now. I think they've got, a couple of offensive linemen who are struggling with health right now that is, definitely impacting them. But, like, at the same time, like, I just feel like watching them, like, the issues are just run deeper than that. And it's just like, just not lining up, not clicking in their building right now. So the line here in the game, it's at Minnesota. The Eagles are favored by 1.5 or 2 points. The Vikings are total is 43.5. I'd probably stay away from it. For all the good things I said about Carson Wentz, I could certainly see him, turning back into, the bad version of Carson Wentz in a matchup against the Eagles and going the other way. But same time, if he plays like he did against the Browns, I think the Vikings win this game. So yeah, probably stay away from that one. And yeah, I think that it could definitely be high scoring game. I think it's tough to start. Roll on Philly's guys right now with the way that everything's going. If you're playing like daily fantasy, Saquon's probably price adjusted accordingly. Haven't checked that for this weekend, but it's a little bit tougher on their side. But yeah, the weapons on the outside for Minnesota, I'd certainly roll with them. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, all that stuff. But if we're talking DFS, because obviously Dynasty, he's on your roster, right? But yeah, I could see Justin Jefferson and/or Jordan Addison and/or TJ Hawkinson having a big one in this one. And hey, throw Jalen Naylor's name in there as a potential option if they just need to get to the depth to attack. Moving along here, a couple games that we can probably hit a little bit quicker. Las Vegas Raiders at the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think the Chiefs look like they're just hitting Mach 10 again, and obviously missing Josh Simmons, but worked out well that they had signed Jalen Moore to that contract, because he stepped in, and he's not Josh Simmons out there who's moving around. He's just outstanding, and but Jalen Moore played well enough in that game, and is certainly not a drop off to just being a black hole at left tackle. So that was a positive for them. I think that you're just seeing a lot of good things happen. Disappointing Simmons wasn't there, because I did think the O-line was really starting to gel, but you saw good things in the passing game. They get Rashee Rice back here. I think Patrick Mahomes is just playing really, really good ball, as he usually does. And they're clicking. Defense seems to be, continuing to come along. Mentioned, Noel Williams emerging as their third corner on the outside a couple weeks ago now, and that's continued to be the case. Has allowed them to re-weaponize Trent McDuffie, which is just a huge development for this defense. And we'll see what Spags can do with it, but I think that they've got a lot of the ingredients they need to have a really good group in Kansas City. I don't think that the Raiders have a lot of the ingredients you need to have a really good team. That win against the Titans was really underwhelming. I thought threw another bad pick in that game when they were leading. It's just not working for them. Colton Miller being out with the high ankle sprain is just just makes a bad offensive line worse. I think that they've really underwhelmed. I had high hopes for Jacoby Myers and what the season might look like for him playing with Geno Smith. That really hasn't come to fruition. I guess that you could say that Trey Tucker is making some plays for them at receiver, but outside of that, I think the offense has just been a disappointment across the board, and that includes Ashton Genty. Obviously the talent is there. We saw that in his one breakout performance, but it's just not working out the way you would have hoped. And on defense, they're just bad, man, and they just got a lot of holes, and love for Devin White's sake that he's making those plays and getting that production. But I think that in my estimation, it was a little bit different than the resurgence that I've seen talked about in a couple different corners, just browsing around after I'd watched film, catching some opinions around the league, and obviously that's not the first time, but yeah, you box score scout that. Devin White was a superstar in that game, but I'd say that it was a little bit more of a Johnny on the spot performance in some ways. So, big line at 11.5 or 12. But yeah, I think the Chiefs are going to kill them. So we'll see. But yeah, I don't think that this Raiders organization is in a positive place right now, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where that leads. Next one up is the New York Giants at the Denver Broncos, and yeah, this is a really interesting game in a lot of ways. The two quarterbacks remind me of one another in a lot of ways. I'd say that what sticks out the most is just how they scramble. I would say, and then how impactful their scrambling has been, and how that has impacted their success early on in their careers. And I think that maybe Jackson Dart is just a little more fluid, a little faster than Bo Nix is a scrambler, but both are quite effective. Dart has taken off for some long gains, including one that got called back. And I think that they do enough as passers that you're interested in what they can develop into over time. Obviously, Dart is working in a pretty, degraded ecosystem right now with Malik Neighbors down for the Giants. Although Andrew Thomas is looking really good in my moving around out there back at left tackle. So really happy to see that for him after battling those injuries. That's definitely helpful. But at the same time, on Bo Nix's side of this game, the Broncos need to get more out of him, and they need to be able to. Again, that Jets game, they were down late in that game against a Jets team that was totally anemic on offense, and it was not. I didn't think because the Jets suddenly looked like the 2001 Ravens on defense, and the Broncos just need Bo to more consistently execute just some of the staples that you used to associate with Sean Payton's offense, right? Because for all the adaptations he's made, Sean Payton's offense was built around Drew Brees, so a lot of that is full field passing concepts, and I'd say that that's where you just don't see Bo really making strides right now. There's just not that part of the playbook getting unlocked, and he makes some really good throws on the run. He definitely has all the physical tools to be a good quarterback in this league, and just, kind of a matter of when they can start getting to more of that stuff and stop being so reliant on getting dig routes open, which is obviously an effective tactic, but if it's the only tactic that you're using effectively in the full field passing game, that's going to get caught on to at some point, and you just can't screen teams to death and not expect them to start reacting to it. So we'll see where it goes with Denver, but yeah, you just wish that was better. It'd be fun to watch. Just both these defenses are just fun to watch, right? Abdul Carter is a blast to watch. I think Kayvon Thibodeau has having more and more just really good moments. I think he just keeps getting better as a pro. Kudos to him for just continuing to level up. Hoping that we start to see the fully dominant Dexter Lawrence. I don't know that we've seen that in this season to the degree we have in the past, but you never know when that'll click in for him. And on the Denver side, it's just a lot of good football players on that side of the ball, and for all of the Jets' struggles on offense in that last one, pretty good defense they're running up against there. So we'll see what happens in that one. Not much of a take on Broncos -7, total 40.5. I don't know, not much of a take there, but if anything, I think the Giants might have earned the respect of getting the other side of the 7 and the 6-5 there. So anyways, nothing I'm running out to throw my money down on. But anyway, one thing that does look interesting, throwing a few shekels on would be this Indianapolis Colts and Los Angeles Chargers game, and I think that the Colts offense is just it's been a blast to watch. Quentin Nelson, it's just so much fun to watch when he's getting weaponized in the run game. I'm thinking in particular of a pull in this last game where he kicked out around Bernard Raymond's down block, and just fun stuff to watch. Bernard Raymond, I think, is playing well for them. Really good players just across the board there, right? In Indy, I think that's been talked to death. And Daniel Jones, he just keeps continuing to play well, and not saying that he's sitting there, making 100% great decisions, or there's not a ball here or there that could be. But who do you really watch all their film and not say that about, right? So I think that Daniel Jones has always had the physical tools and everything. At this point, like you're feeling like the biggest question for the rest of the way here for the rest of his career is, can he stay healthy throughout the season? And obviously having Jonathan Taylor running the ball the way he is and just having the infrastructure around him is allowing him to play football in a way that he shouldn't be getting just killed the way he was at times with the Giants. So hopefully that all works out for him, because league is better with more good starting quarterbacks, and right now Daniel Jones is a really good starting quarterback. Speaking of really good starting quarterbacks, that guy Justin Herbert, he's something, huh? Loved listening to Jim Harbaugh's comments about that play at the end of the game. Jim Harbaugh is just, what a gift to humanity that man is. But yeah, I think the Chargers, it's obviously not worked out the way they envisioned it really at all. As I'm speaking about them, geez, the guy's name is some of my mind again, but I think that a couple of weeks ago on the show I was talking about Storm Norton playing left tackle for them, and again, just getting old, man. But yeah, it's Austin Deculus rocking number 74, third year player out of LSU. That's not Storm Norton, who used to wear 74 for the Chargers. But anyways, I apologize for that mistake. I obviously try to avoid those types of errors. But yeah, in any case, Austin Deculus, it's getting a little bit better, but he's still continuing to struggle here. I had talked about him in the context of what Abdul Carter had done to him in the Giants game, which was not pretty at all. Really rough welcome to the NFL moment. But yeah, Deculus might be playing a little bit better, but and this line is kind of slogging it out at this point. But I'd say it's more the offense just kind of adjusting to where they're at. I mean, Bobby Hart was playing tackle for them last week. If I got another one, y'all make sure I'm getting that right in the background as I talk about this. But yeah, one of those ones where it's like, okay, well, yeah, the point where we've got Bobby Hart going out on the field again here. Bobby Hart for sure. Was rocking 66 for them, and not that I thought he played terrible or anything like that, but I thought that he had retired like 2 or 3 years ago now. So it's one of those things that's a little bit surprising when it pops up. So despite that, Herbert is playing so damn well right now, and they're finding ways with playmakers. I thought Kamani Vidal stepped up in a big way as the running back last week, hit his explosives, I thought, ran with solid vision and just did a good job overall. And then, I thought Trey Harris, it wasn't anything big, but he just, caught a now pass down, with I think Rasul Douglas was like maybe 8 yards off of him. They'd thrown the same thing over to Keandre Lambert-Smith earlier. They did it off a little, play fake from the gun, which, I don't know about that timing exactly when you got the corner triggering on your receiver, but that is what it is. It worked out just fine for Trey Harris on the timing. I guess I'd throw out there because he was able to make a nice move and evade, and it just struck me that we'll see what he develops into, but just big, long athlete who moves well. We've seen what's happened with London Johnston during his 2 years with Harbaugh. So I think that's got a lot of positive potential, and for the time being, Lad McConkey is stepping up. I think continuing to be a good player for them, and Justin Herbert's just such a good player that I think that a lot of this is just going to keep working. They are going up against a Colts defense that I think has potential for serious problems. On the flip side of that, I think that the Colts defense has done some good things this year, but with Charvarius Ward, I assume he's going to be out with this concussion after that whole debacle of a situation in warmups. I just don't think they've got good enough players at cornerback, and this has been a consistent issue over the past few years, and that's a tough one to deal with. I think that the safeties have done some good things. Cam Bynum, especially for them coming over, but I don't love the linebacker situation, and I think that just creates a lot of questions about the defense. So I think that even without their offensive line, the Chargers are likely to be able to score points in this game. You flip that over to the other side, I think the Chargers are a very solid and sound defense, but they're not overwhelming. I think that Deion Henley is and Derwin James, I guess, would be their two best players in the middle of the field, but I don't think that they have corners. I don't think they've got corners that are getting burned, but I don't think they've got corners that are really impacting the game, or you really feel their presence and really want to stay away from them. And then, I would say that probably Tierra Tart is their most dominant defensive lineman in stretches, and they do have good depth and a good rotation, but that's not the same as having, just, the group that the Los Angeles Rams are rolling out, right? Where you've just got several names that you absolutely have to account for. So, all that's to say, I think the Colts could put up points in this game as well with all the positive things I said about their offense. So, I personally like the over in this, 48.5 or so, that's one that sticks out to me a little bit. Great weather out in LA. So, hey, obviously, just throwing these picks out there as I go. So, do with that information what you will. Up next, we got that Washington-Dallas game, which, man, this total is up at 54.5 now. I have seen 55 this week, which is just such an absurdly high total for an NFL game. But I got no arguments against that number, right? I think it should be there. Washington is dealing with injuries, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, Terry McLaurin is supposed to be back this week. And then, on top of that, I didn't think that they just were not good on offense against the Bears. I thought that they made a lot of mistakes, and if you're fumbling the ball, multiple times in a game, and throw, it's just going to make life hard, right? You're not going to score points when that happens. So I think that, this Dallas defense, not really stopping anybody, and especially in the run game last week. So I think that Washington will have a good time playing against them. And I mentioned some of Washington's deficiencies on defense last week, or earlier in the show, in the context of the Bears. And yes, I think that Dallas did not have the best week running the ball against the Panthers. They certainly had a great week throwing the ball to George Pickens in particular, who is just, man, it has that guy not entered the discussion as top 5-10 receiver. Obviously the talent was there, but man, I think he's taking it to a new level. I mean, some of the run after catch stuff in this last game was just phenomenal. And if the Cowboys are if they get CeeDee Lamb back for this game, I mean, man, they're throwing a lot of weapons at you there. So that, and then the run game did not have its best week last week. Washington's defense, they're probably gonna have something of an emphasis on the run after last week's game, but I don't know how much it's going to help them, because this has been a problem for a little while now. And if Dallas needs an opponent to bounce back against in the run game, I would certainly say that Washington is not a bad candidate there. So we'll see what happens there. Washington 1-point favorite on the road. In most places I'm seeing, I think you could probably look at this to bounce to the other side. So, I don't know. Total's very high, but, understand why. And, if you're into playing teaser legs, if you can play both sides of this and pair both Washington and Dallas teased up to 7 with some different options, hey, that seems like a reasonable play to me. I'm just looking down the sheet right now, and, you can tease Green Bay down to be a winner from 6.5 or 7-1, and then you can also tease Atlanta up to be a 7.5 point underdog against San Francisco on Sunday Night Football. So a couple of different ways that you can get across the 1 and the 7 there. So if you're teasing off the 7 for the Packers, I guess. So you've got a 6.5, so that'd be a half a point. So not quite the same as crossing the 7, but still not terrible. So moving on to that Green Bay Arizona game, I'll be it's actually reasonably interesting game, right? Like the Cardinals pushed the Colts last week. Jacoby Brissett, definitely threw the ball well overall. Nothing that we haven't seen from Jacoby Brissett before, I don't think, but just a really solid game. Obviously, don't think a ton of that Colts defense. We'll see. Arizona, I think, is going to really struggle on the offensive line against this Packers defensive front. And if Marvin Harrison, isn't back from his concussion, then they do not really have a whole lot as far as wide receivers to threaten the Green Bay corners, which I think Keyshawn Nixon has continued to be pretty competitive, but the other outside corner spot is something that people are picking at right now. So we'll see what happens there. Harrison, I think, is starting to play really, really good football. I think that he's kind of come out of his shell a little bit in a sense in the past couple of weeks since he made that huge touchdown catch against the Seahawks. I feel like he's playing with some more attitude, which is really cool to see. Bummer that he got the concussion. If that ball's placed a little bit better, he doesn't have to adjust. But that neither here nor there. On the Packers side, think that the offense stepped up when it needed to against the Bengals. Not some overwhelmingly dominant performance, but they just have so many good pieces, and they need to put it together more consistently. And we'll see how it looks. This is I think a pretty good Arizona defense. I especially if Max Melton and Will Johnson are both out there at outside cornerback, I think that does a lot for this group. Makes them tough to go against. Not ungettable on the outside as we saw with JSN for the Seahawks against the Cardinals and Max Melton in the fourth quarter of that game specifically. But at the same time, pretty good players on the outside, pretty feisty. So I think that Green Bay should be heavy favorite on the road as they are. I think that if anything, the game might tend to play a little bit under because I think it is going to be tough for the Cardinals to really work on the Packers given some of the issues, and then especially with some of the athletes that the Packers have to match up to Trey McBride. And then on the flip side, Arizona is tough on defense. So 44.5 total, nothing crazy here. So does seem to have the potential to be a little bit of a lower scoring game, and it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out in the afternoon there. So Sunday Night Football, Atlanta at San Francisco. It was really interesting watching that Buffalo Atlanta game because it's good and Bijan Robinson is just phenomenal, but I think that had kind of been established at this point in the season. All things considered, I did not think that was a great outing for Michael Penix. He's always. It seems like he's almost always going to have his handful of high throws, but for one thing, he almost threw an interception on that last drive when they're up by 7 points before they kicked the field goal to make it 10, and it could have been a pick six. And they were in field goal range at that point in the game. I don't have the exact notes on the play up right now, but it was just one of those things where. And this is on top of in the game, he'd already, there's just so many ball placement mistakes. And, as good as it looks when Michael Penix is dialed in, and I think when he's dialed in, it looks as good as anybody. I feel like his accuracy at this point is as scattershot as anybody in the NFL, and he's spraying more balls than pretty much anybody right now. And, and that continued in the last game. And then you're just adding in some of these not great decisions. And, I think that the kid has a ton of potential, don't get me wrong, and he throws the ball beautifully, but it's not all there right now, right? Now, fortunately, Bijan is doing a great job of helping out, and then Drake London, they really unlocked in this last game, but, I think that, schematically, they're doing a lot with Bijan. He's running a ton before the snap, which, I don't know how much I love that for the long term, but, I think they're doing a good job schematically featuring him and getting Tyler Algier mixed in. But, I think there is just so much more they can untap with Kyle Pitts that they just don't really get into that bag. And with Darnell Mooney out right now, it's just not an overwhelming offense around Michael Penix. Jeez, blanked on his name for a second there. And so we'll see. At the same time, Atlanta's defense is looking really good. And, I think that there's a lot to be said about the front. I think Caden Ellis is looking like he's going to be the first team All-Pro linebacker. Obviously, Fred Warner going down has a good amount to do with that. But, what Caden Ellis does as a Swiss Army knife at the off-ball linebacker position, I mean, this guy is a legitimate pass rusher who can, disengage from offensive linemen with quick pass rush moves to get quick wins. Which is just not normal. Like normally linebackers or, Jamal Adams, when they're picking up tons of sacks, they're just running through open lanes on blitzes or something like that. That's not what Caden Ellis is bringing. He's like a legit pass rusher, despite, the lack of size. And I think he's just all over the field for this defense. Between having him in the middle and having Jesse Bates paired with Xavier Watts, who despite they probably could have handled that seam up the middle a little bit better between the two of them last week. Don't want to be casting judgment or blame. PFF in the news from what I heard the McAfee show this week. I don't know what their assignment was there, but I thought that that split the touchdown that split the middle for the Bills there, they probably could have handled that a little bit better. But generally, those two play with great coordination and have super high football IQ. I do not understand why the Bills. It was only twice, but after the first third down where they tried Keon Coleman on AJ Terrell, I have no idea why you would come back to that matchup ever again. So, much less in the same game. AJ is just, that game against Terry McLaurin late last season, I still sticks out to me as it's like, oh man, this guy's not just an above average corner, and like that. I kind of had him graded as it's like this guy is he's legit. Like there's a lot of really good corners in football right now, but man, AJ Terrell can ball. So yeah, there's some other guy. I think you can still maybe get after Mike Hughes a little bit, but it's a lot harder because there's a lot more structure around Mike Hughes in that defense there as opposed to like some of the guys that you got in say the Raiders secondary where it's like Kyu Blue Kelly is a mark and then the other four guys are not really helping. So I think that Atlanta is just fun to watch and coming along. The flip side of it is San Francisco continues to compete and they're the home team here. I'm not sure if it'll be Brock Purdy or Mac Jones. Obviously probably matters to some degree, but less than it does for most teams. I think Mac's done good job overall. But with San Francisco, they just between Bosa going down, Fred Warner going down. They're dealing with all these injuries at the receiver position between whatever Juwan Jennings is dealing with, and then Ricky Pearsall's in and out of the lineup, and Christian McCaffrey has been good, and it's great to see him healthy, but I don't think that he looks like Bijan Robinson right now, which is definitely the level that Christian used to be at as well. So it'll be interesting. I don't think that San Francisco's defense is suddenly going to collapse because I think that there's pretty solid players across the board there, but you're now at the point where I can't really point to your blue chippers or really even like say who the impact players are really supposed to be at this stage in the game with those guys down. So I don't know where it's all going in San Francisco, but it's not feeling great right now for them. And definitely some young players who are coming along and everything, but this certainly doesn't feel like their season. So, we'll see how it works out. Sunday Night Football, big moment, and everything like that. I definitely think this game could go either way. I think as I mentioned earlier, maybe tease the Falcons up. You could also see it being low scoring with, as good as the Falcons defense has played. And then, with Penix's aforementioned issues, I think it's just, they could definitely boom and go way over this total with the two teams. But there's also it seems like right now, maybe a 20 to 25% chance that Penix has one of those like really good games where he happens to be dialed in on the small sample set of throws that he's going to throw in a single game. But it seems like more the norm is going to be kind of that median outcome where he's just missing 5 or 6 throws a game. That if he could cut the number down to 1 or 2, it would, make all the difference in the world. But, he has to cut the number down. So we'll see how it all works out. But yeah, it was, one of those things where, you throw on the film after the Buffalo game and you hear, how the world is, falling because, things are falling apart in Buffalo because, they lost one game late to the Patriots and then lost a game against the Falcons where they had multiple opportunities for the game to go in a different direction. And, obviously we need to fire everybody because that happened. So anyways, Bills are off this week, but, I would say that, if anybody in Buffalo is thinking of, just calling it a season, packing up and going home, I think that would be a little bit of an overreaction at this point. So anyways, moving on to Monday Night Football, which is a really cool slate, honestly. And I'm going to go in reverse order here because I think talking Houston and Seattle first makes more sense given what the nightcap is with Tampa Bay, Detroit. We'll get to talk about 3 quarterbacks together here who have all improved a ton, and then another guy who's reminding folks that there's probably still a little bit of talent left in C.J. Stroud. So I think that we could talk about C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans and some of the improvements we saw in their most recent performances, and make a total and draw a direct parallel with the situation Jacksonville had, where Jacksonville was having the success, but now they are going to get back into a situation where the Texans' weakness in their offensive line is going to be put to a test again. And honestly, it's funny how it all comes together, right? Because week 1 against the Rams was a total nightmare for the Houston offensive line. It was an abject disaster. But it was one of those things where obviously knew that the Houston plan coming into the season was, there were a lot of moving parts there. Let's be kind about it, and part with through the second quarter, it's like this was a total pipe dream. This ain't working at all. Now I do think that Houston has improved in the weak sense. I think that Arianti Ursary looks more comfortable out there. The more reps he gets, he's certainly not getting kind of. I mean, he's had some rough games so far. Let's leave it at that. But I think he is getting more comfortable out there. So hopefully that continues to get a little bit better. They seem to have settled on who's going to be playing where. It seems like Titus Howard is going to be the right tackle. So if they can get that stuff ironed out and get the communication better, and just do those things better, that's going to help them out a lot. But the talent deficiency is still there, and on the interior against the Seahawks here, I mean this could be a really rough game for the interior players. The Texans are rolling out, whether that's Jake Andrews or Ed Ingram seems to be the guy that they're settling on there. At the one guard spot, and again, we will see how this works out. But go call the folks in Minnesota, and some more to Ezra Cleveland. It's like, why was Ed Ingram available in the first place? And I think it's just one of those things. So. We'll see. They're going to get a good test in this one, and it's been fun. I think that Nick Chubb has looked better than you could have hoped. Maybe coming off that major knee injury. I'm not saying he's the Nick Chubb old, but he's making some plays for them for sure, and it's going to be interesting to see how all the other pieces fit. But as we've seen in some other weeks with Houston. And as we saw with Jacksonville last week, if they just get the doors blown off of them on the offensive line, all this other stuff, ceases to matter. It becomes, just a footnote. And so in any case, I'm sorry, I mentioned that it might have settled in on Titus Howard at the tackle spot, but Blake Fisher is still getting rotated in there as well. So I don't think that they really know. I should not jump the gun on that just based on what one alignment here or there anyways, but we'll see how it all looks for them this week. But it has not been good. On the other side of the ball, Texans defense does look really, really good. And I mean, they're just such a fun unit to watch. I mean, they are dynamic in a way that I feel like, no other defense in the NFL really is. The Packers maybe have a similar feel, but just because they don't have the corners, it doesn't feel that way. And, Kamari Lassiter, I think, is just having such a great year across from Derek Stingley, who seems to have leveled up even more. I mean, Stingley, I think, is having his best season. And I think that Lassiter has made like a really big jump to being, probably just an above average corner that that dude's getting some color in any grading scale at this point. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they end up playing against the Seahawks here, because the Seahawks are able to play out this very run heavy style, and pair that up with Sam Darnold attacking down the field and being man, is he throwing the ball great right now. I think it's a pretty potent attack so far. Like, they've been able to get a lot done. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet are really good backs. And, this is a really effective formula to combat what Houston ideally wants to do. Houston is a team that, not that they're not a good defense on first or second down, but where they're a nightmare is third down, where, Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter are coming off the edge. And, I mean, obviously, both good players against the run. Anderson is an elite player against the run, and Hunter's always been good against the run as well. But, they're even more, it's even scarier when they're coming at you, right? And, and then you really weaponize Stingley and Lassiter on the outside and everything that you can do around them. So I think that, when you're trying to deal with this Houston defense, if you can, keep the chains moving and keep yourself from falling behind the sticks and getting into third and medium, third and long situations as much as possible, that's only going to help you out. And, for Seattle, that goes along with, their general strategy, helps them activate the play action pass game, all those types of things. So, I think that, it's one of those things where, at the end of the day, I think that Seattle is favored by 3 for a reason. Total of 41.5, which could definitely see this one being low scoring. Obviously, very low total there, but it does strike me as a game that could end up being. Yeah, we just saw that with the Seahawks against the Jaguars, right? With a 30-point game in total. But I think at the end of the day, Sam Darnold is playing better than C.J. Stroud yeah, he's playing better than a lot of quarterbacks right now, and that's like less a knock on C.J. Stroud than just saying Sam Darnold's playing like really, really good football right now. And like, there's still a couple questionable throws that you'd like to have back, but similar to what I was saying about Daniel Jones, like who can you not say that about? And you know, the offense is really well schemed up, and they're doing such a good job of featuring Jackson Smith and Jigba, and those other pieces like Torrey Horton, you know, make an impact. They just do a lot, and you know, hopefully, we've seen the end of the Jalen Milroe experiments, and you know, if that's the case, then I think the Seattle offense is really something to be reckoned with. So you know, I think that 3-point favorite is very fair for them. They should probably be favored by, you know, maybe a couple more points, just given how bad that matchup is for Houston's offensive line. But hey, you know, this is the NFL, so who knows? And yeah, to wrap up the show, let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Detroit Lions. Which, you know, I'm thinking maybe they had a rematch early last year, but what really sticks out to me is 2 years ago, the 2 game sequence where the Bucks had been one of the few teams to beat the Lions that season. I think in Detroit, maybe in a kind of surprise upset win. That would have been, I think, Baker's first year with Tampa Bay. And then, you know, they had the rematch in the playoffs, if I'm remembering that all correctly. And, you know, fast forward 2 more years, and I feel like these guys have just continued to level up with Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff. And, you know, I guess that one of the things I really take from watching film these days is just, you know, what it means to be resilient, and, you know, what life is all about, and, you know, that the whole journey, right? And like, you know, becoming something, and what do we do with our time as human beings here, and how do you respond to adversity, and you know, what are you going to do with the time that's available to you? And you know, I think that in both the cases of, you know, Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff, you've just seen them continue to become the best versions of themselves. And I think it's pretty hard to say that the talent was never there, given some of the things that they did early in their careers, with Cleveland and Los Angeles, respectively. But at the same time, I don't think that anyone would say that those guys are the same quarterbacks that they are today. And I think that, you know, they both just reach such a high level mentally, and it just allows them to unlock their physical gifts, which, you know, they're not the Josh Allens of the world, but like these guys do throw the ball really, really well. I mean, that's always stood out about Jared Goff, that, yeah, he just, yeah, there are certain balls he throws that are just, you know, he's one of the best in the league at throwing. Like, you know, I love his, it's not as big of a part in this offense, but I used to love the just kind of heat seeking sideline verticals he would throw. And the Rams offense are the ones that pop them in my head as I talk about this. Obviously, it's been so much more the dig routes in Detroit that they've had so much success with, but you know, he's just operating at such a high level. Similarly, Baker is just, you know, he's just a dog, man. Like, you know, just such great timing, anticipation, you know, really making the most out of his athletic gifts as a scrambler at this point, which, you know, again, he's not Lamar Jackson, but he operates with such a good sense of timing in the pocket that he's able to make these crazy ass plays. And then, you know, the 3rd and 13 play, I mean, watching that back, it reminded me of the Adam Sandler version of The Longest Yard, and you know, the play where the quarterback, whoever he is in that movie, makes the crazy ass run, and then yeah, has the whole moment on the field. But yeah, but I mean, Baker was just a dog, and against the Seahawks, and you know, he just competes, and you know, continues to make huge plays, huge throws down the field, and yeah, I think he can access every area of the field, and yeah, you know, if you want to make a steel case for, you know, what Bo Nix, what Jackson Dart like would seem to have the skill set, Spencer Rattler would seem to have the physical skill set to kind of evolve into as they get more and more reps and acquire more and more experiences in the league. You know, what Baker is doing right now has really changed my tune on this whole discussion, because, you know, I will always lean towards being in the camp of height, weight, speed when evaluating for this league. I've just been, you know, watching it over the years. Like, that's just such a, you know, huge advantage that you just can't, you know, can't just acquire those traits, right? And but at the same time, as much as I love, you know, the Justin Herberts, the Josh Allens, and you know, ultimately, I think that there's something to be said for having those guys in the biggest moments. Well, hey, if Baker Mayfield is going to find a way to do things like he did on 3rd and 13, then I don't really know what the justification is, because he's going to be able to throw the ball as well as any of those guys in terms of accessing different areas of the field and different concepts, and all sorts of different good stuff. So, you know, hey, yeah, I think it's always good to keep an open mind when you're doing this stuff. I think it's kind of essential, honestly. It's just, sometimes you kind of get in your flow and get caught in your rhythms, and you don't question yourself enough. So yeah. Anyways, big thank you to Baker Mayfield and Baker Mayfield especially here for causing me to continue to question myself and continue to try to get a little bit better at this whole evaluation thing each week. So anyway, they got a 52.5 total in that game. Detroit is favored by 5.5 or 6, and I certainly think high scoring game makes a lot of sense as the total would indicate. I think that the number is frankly disrespectful to Tampa Bay. I understand that they have a lot of injuries right now. They have had a lot of injuries every week for the whole season, right? Like Tristan Wirfs wasn't playing to start the season, and Graham Barden was playing left tackle, which, God, that was so funny. Just that threw me for such a huge loop trying to figure out what the hell was going on. That first snap really was checking out Tampa Bay's line for the season, but Wirfs is back. He's looking healthy. They're losing some guys, obviously, with Ibuka going down with the hamstring last week, but they're gaining others, albeit at different positions, and offensive line seems to be coming together, and all the depth that they have acquired at receiver is all paying off right now, and we'll see what happens here, but I don't think Detroit is exactly world leaders on defense. I think they're very solid, just like Tampa Bay is pretty solid. And on that note, how about Jacob Parrish for Tampa Bay, just continuing to show up week after week? I think that he's had a huge impact on the way the defense has improved this year, as has Hassan Reddick and what he's added in. But, I think that Tampa Bay has definitely taken a step forward on defense relative to where they were last year as well. And then, I think Detroit, there's a lot of good things to be said for their defense. It's just, it's not the Houston Texans, right? And, I think Aiden Hutchinson's continuing to play better and better. Again, don't need to take up too much more time, but this should be a fantastic game. At the end of the day, though, I think that is it. That's a big number for the Detroit Lions to have to cover on Monday Night Football against Baker Mayfield, because I just do not think that we live in a world right now where Baker isn't, to use his words, gonna wake up feeling dangerous on Monday. So feeling dangerous, probably nice little reference to end this particular episode of the podcast on given the whole cry havoc and getting to meet Jack Carr last night. So as always, thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you want to support my work and everything like that, hey, subscribe to the pod, everything like that, to hear me talk football, but just my other projects, you can go to onemanexperiment.com. You can find the Bubble Society through the links there, or you can just look that up on Amazon. But just dropped this with the new cover very recently. So this is my dystopian epic novel that I've been working on for a couple of years here. So if you're into reading at all, and you like some crazy ass stories, then might enjoy this. So I will call it for the day here. Clean up this stack of books I just let fall over, and go out and enjoy this beautiful day. So hey, anyone tuning in, thanks for listening. Always fun for me to sit here and talk about the league and think about things. So hope you enjoyed. Have a great one, everyone.